Welcome to the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I'm Jen Sproul, CEO of the Institute of Internal Communication. Since we launched this series in 2021, the world of work has been disrupted by event after event. A pandemic, geopolitics, AI, extreme weather events, remote and hybrid working, generational shifts, inclusion, diversity, the entire nature of how we work needs transformation. This podcast explores opportunities for internal communication in the future of work. Internal comms is a critical function that helps organisations achieve lasting change, building trust and relationship between people in pursuit of shared goals. Please join me, Dominic Walters, and Kat Barnard as we dissect what this means for internal communication. With relentless change the new normal, it's time to reimagine our profession.
Hello and welcome to a fresh episode of the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I'm Kat Barnard, joined as ever by Dominic Walters, and sadly absent today is Jennifer Sproul. She is off celebrating a wedding, and I think in this interesting, challenging times, we should all be grabbing for all the celebrations we can find. So we will forgive her absence today. Today, we want to talk about artificial intelligence. It is never far from the news, and we are all constantly grappling with the intense pressure of feeling like we ought to be using it more at work, but without necessarily having clear guidelines or guardrails from our employers. And when I had a pre-show meeting with our guest today, we went off down a track that I hadn't anticipated, but I think it is a really, really interesting topic, an element, a substrand of artificial intelligence that doesn't seem to be getting addressed in the mainstream press. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to our guest today, Zoe Colosimo, welcome, Zoe.
Good to be here, thank you.
Zoe is the Chief Operating Officer at Neighbourly, which is an organisation dedicated to helping companies bring their brand purpose to life. It launched in 2014, and since then it has enabled businesses to make meaningful contributions to local communities through volunteer time, grants and surplus products. And it's built a network of over 45,000 local causes and more than 9,000 company offices and branches, which is created nearly £1 billion worth of social value across the UK and Ireland. And I will confess that, as I say, when we first started talking, I thought we might be having an entirely different conversation. But Zoe promptly brought me onto the topic of AI. So, Zoe, first and foremost, please can I ask you to tell us a little bit more about Neighbourly and what it does, and in particular, what it is doing in the context of AI.
Very definitely. So, if I start at the very beginning, that's probably the best place to be. I used to work agency side, and in that agency, we learned quite quickly that there was a real need by the brands that we were working for and with to communicate locally, to build brand reputation, brand awareness within the communities that companies were serving. And we used to get quite a lot of briefs saying, well, could you match me with a local fete? Could you find me a boxing club or some form of sporting club so that my company can collaborate and work with them? And we did that on a repeat cycle for brands as disparate as, Land Rover, Jaguar, Tesco, the Department of Health even. And what we were able to prove is if you're able to match the local good causes, I suppose, with the brand pillar of the organisation, i.e. Tesco looking for causes to support with food and nutrition or causes that could help with public health messaging, you could really generate some interesting relationships within the community. And then more than that, you're able to really prove an ROI for the company because you're able to say, well, here are the individuals you've connected with, and here's the change you've created as a result of those connections. But For those of you that are old enough to remember the yellow pages, this was utterly unscalable, and we built a big old team that used to check for these local instances in the yellow pages, or ring the local council, or ring a newspaper and try and mine all of these local instances of good causes, charities, schools, etc., and bring transparency to them. And that was really very hard work indeed. So if you're a retailer, it was nigh on impossible to be able to connect every store with community causes in their neighbourhood in a way that was transparent and safe for everyone as well. So fast forward away from that agency experience, the old MD there started to think about how could we actually bring these entities, companies and charities together into a digital platform. And Nick's observation was very true, that if you bring these two entities together into a digital platform, you create transparency around where the charity is and what they need. And on the other side, you create transparency around the business and what they potentially have to give to that organisation. And it just so happens that Neighbourly has three major routes that companies can now donate to those communities. And that's through provision of volunteer time, so their workforce, grant funds, match funding and local fundraising, but also surplus products. And we do a lot of surplus redistribution. So you mentioned earlier those 9,000 instances. That means that there's help going into 9,000 neighbourhoods pretty much every day, specifically in terms of meals into communities too. And because we have a live network, i.e. it is not a static way of advertising that your charity is located somewhere. It's a marketplace where it's alive and we have conversation with our community. We hear from them with great regularity around, as I mentioned earlier, what they might need. You will not be surprised to hear that the needs of our local good causes have increased since the pandemic. And post-pandemic, we're seeing around 400 people being supported by each local good cause each week. We're seeing that, interestingly, they're needing to turn away around 50 people each week because they don't have the capacity to support them. So we have this live marketplace where we can hear the needs of those causes. So we also hear about where there might be support requirements in other means other than cash in the till. And we started to find out from them around what else could be provided to them. And they said that they needed help with digital skills, they needed help with admin tasks. But we also started to include a question around, well, have you heard about generative AI? And if you have you started with your introduction to your charity? And we're quite shocked when we could see around 70% of them had said that they hadn't got started, but their funding is being depleted. They have less volunteers coming into their organisations and they have more people to support. And that created an imperative for us that we could see there is a burning need for us to help solve a problem in the charitable community to help upskill them.
And that really was the tip of the iceberg, because I have to say, when we first started talking about having a conversation today, I thought that we would go deep on, and I appreciate that what I'm about to say sounds nonsensical in the round, but I thought we were going to go deep into sustainability. And of course, this is a strand of sustainability, but it's just an unusual strand. And even for me, I spend all day, every day looking at trends and the implications of those trends on work. But I hadn't thought at all about what we're going to talk about now until you started to describe it to me, Zoe. So I just want to frame this, because in preparation for the episode, I started having a little bit of a dig around at some of the data points around digital dexterity and the extent to which people in the UK are equipped to use digital tools. Because, of course, generative AI is a primary one. And, of course, we're hearing all day long from those with a vested interest in telling us that we must adopt it, that all manner of people are already proficient in generative AI use. However, when I was prepping, I went to the website of the charity Good Things Foundation, which is a charity set up to help the country reduce its digital divide. And I found their most recent data points showing that 3.7 million families in this country are beneath the minimum digital living standard. 7.8 million people in this country lack basic digital skills. This is one that almost has given me goosebumps, although I don't even know why it would give me goosebumps when I think about it. 1.9 million households in this country struggle to afford their mobile phone contract, and 21 million adults in this country can't complete the essential digital tasks for their work. So it is no surprise, really, that there would be a great proportion of people in this country who simply don't know where to get started. And that brought us onto the topic of the AI adoption gap, which is what you were alluding to just previously. So I wondered if you could explain to our listeners what the AI adoption gap is.
Yes, you used a really important word earlier, and that was sustainable. And we have to think about that word in many different ways. We're not just talking about greening and planting, we're actually talking about sustainable communities in this instance. And communities can't be sustainable if they don't have the skills and the resources in those communities, and they don't have a way of flowing economic opportunity into those communities. So sustainable communities really is at the heart of this. And some of those numbers you have described there are really all around digital poverty. But of course, you layer on top of that the number of adults living in poverty full stop in the UK is over 20%, which is startling for a country that's considered rich, considered to be a wealthy Western country. But the reality is 20% of the people living it can't afford the basics. There is then no surprise that the vast majority of those individuals are also suffering from some form of digital poverty. And so when we think about it in those terms, we've really got the perfect storm. The local good causes in our neighbourhoods, the community centres, the food banks, the places where people most vulnerable will go for support are on the back foot, and they do not have the skills that they need. And some instances that's driven because they don't have access to the technology. Sometimes it's because they don't have the time, but the challenge is they have not had the opportunity to upskill yet. Then you also think about the fact that you've got all of these individuals that have low or no access to the tools that they need to be able to perform their tasks within the home or to support children with homework. You start to see that there really is a critical divide in society. AI, and we're really talking about generative AI here. Generative AI speeds up the individual. It augments the individual and it makes things faster. It makes the opportunity to learn far more democratic. It gives you access to information in a structured way that is phenomenally powerful for the future. So I like to say generative AI is a bit like democratizing education, because you can ask it to write you a lesson plan or something. But all of these people that are currently considered as the most disadvantaged and vulnerable in society do not have access to this opportunity. And then more than that, already around 80% of employers are saying we will not employ an individual that is not able to demonstrate that they have some form of AI skills. And again, for the record, AI is a vast topic. We really are talking about generative AI here. But, you layer that 80% stat on top of generative AI, and that precludes a significant number of people from having the opportunity to gain work even. So the worry is layering generative AI over the tier of society that is already living in poverty. It just accelerates that and it makes the gap far, far wider.
Zoe, just I'm fascinated by this because it's opened up a whole new world. One of the things we try and do in this podcast is to help internal communicators understand the environment which they're working in now and certainly going to be working in. And you've opened up a whole new area. So the fact that we have such an inequality, I guess I hadn't really appreciated how important the quality of access to AI or even digital skills was in terms of people's being part of society and also being employed as well. So it'd be useful just to go through in more detail some of the dangers of AI and digital inequality, and in particular, how you and other organizations are going about it, and doing so that internal communicators can start to think about what they can do within their organizations to prompt them. Hey, again, a complex question. Let's go back to what are the dangers of inequality and what are you doing to try and tackle that?
The summary is the danger is a two-tier society that sadly already exists. And you layer AI over the top and you really do deepen that inequality and the opportunity for those individuals to access some form of employment, to continue to contribute to the neighbourhoods that they live in. It really does have an all-encompassing threat to our sustainable communities. It really, really does. The very important thing about generative AI is also, if you are going to be thinking about accessing it as a tool, is that you do that safely as well. So there's much chatter on the news cycles, in every LinkedIn article that you'll ever read, around the pros and the cons of using AI and how companies are getting ready or not getting ready and why they are or why they aren't. But the greatest need is that we do take a step back as human beings and we think about safety, security, and safeguarding. So the three S's. We must remember that when we're interfacing with some of these tools, that what goes in stays in there. You can't get it out again. So you shouldn't ever be thinking about and should be really careful about declaring really personal things. But more than that, of course, identifiable information about other people is really challenging as well. When you're thinking about it as a business user, making sure that there is all of the protocols in place to make sure that you aren't using a system which is not locked in to your environment and you aren't actually leaking IP into the tools that you might be wanting to test as a business. And safeguarding, we must all be very, very aware about the young people, the vulnerable people in society, and enabling them to understand that whilst this is an opportunity for augmenting, speeding up, and making things more efficient, there is also a real threat and worry about people creating a kind of digital relationship with their AI tool. And there have been some pretty catastrophic consequences on the back of that, which have been well reported. So the threat is multifaceted. We create this two-tier society, but in the ambition to get people engaged and using these tools out there, that what we don't do is shortcut the education piece. And that education piece is mission critical. And one of the reasons that we felt strongly enough about it to actually build a mini training program for our community, but also all of the corporate partners that we work with to upskill and train in the basics of AI. And we did that in partnership with Microsoft. We went to them and we said that we can hear from a good cause community that they're not sure how to get started safely. We hear from the corporate partners that we're working with that there's ambition to help upskill the good cause community. And then more than that, a lot of the corporate partners said, well, we're not quite sure how to get started either. So the program that we created was called AI 123, and it really quite simply is the safe route for getting started. It introduces you to the AI systems which are considered safe and tested, all of the mainstream ones that you would perhaps have all heard of. But particularly we recommend Copilot, because Copilot is something that we can see has been very transparent in how it has been built. You can also access it for free via Bing. So there are all kinds of reasons that we wanted to build out a system that enabled that free-to-use access. And then more than that, to invite some talking heads from Microsoft to explain a little bit about the history of how generative AI in particular has come about, and also what the future of it is likely to be. And within that training system, there is also a template for a policy. And that policy is helping everyone, whether you're just a human that wants to think about the use in the family, or whether you're actually an SME or an upscale business, or importantly, a good cause. It's your baseline policy to understand where the red lines are, where the boundaries are, and back to the 3 S's, making sure that everyone stays safe as they go about augmenting and speeding up some of the things that they might be doing on a day-to-day basis.
It's interesting as you're talking about that, because I guess in a crude analysis, we normally think of inequality as being caused by unequal access to resources. And that's clearly the case here. But it's also, I guess, motivation and fear, because I imagine there are lots of people who have the resources, the material resources to use AI, don't want to, or fear it, or this may be a factor of age, it may be a factor of attitude, of upbringing and so on. So it's as difficult to overcome.
It is, you're right. And that has come up as well. There's fear because I don't know what it is. There's fear because of I don't know what the environmental impact's going to be. There's fear because I don't understand it. And I think actually it's going to erode my role at work. There's also fear coming from the senior leadership in charities, but businesses alike, because it's very new. The leadership are unable to lean on the playbook, the historic playbook that has, I suppose, created their role in the first place. That playbook is no longer relevant because the future doesn't actually have the same answers in it. The future is that we're going to be managing teams of digital agents. We aren't going to have teams of human beings. All kinds of system changes will happen over the next 3 years. The way that we interface with the World Wide Web has already started to change significantly, and you will have noticed when you pop your Google search in or your Bing search that you don't go to the website any longer. You get an AI summary and it tells you everything you need to know, and then you go away again. So there's a real challenge for businesses out there needing to think about not just their SEO strategies any longer, but their geo strategies. How do they show up in generative AI platforms as well? So back to your point around fear, it really is multifaceted, and addressing each one of those fear points is necessary, but it always starts with that baseline education of, well, kind of this is what it is, and this is how to use it in a really sensible way. Part of the training that is, I think, fundamental and part of AI 123 is an introduction to something called prompt writing. And prompt writing is really you being able to describe to your LLM, this is what you would like some help with. This is the instruction. And you have to consider that like discussing a brief with a human being. If you give them a really bad brief, you're going to get a bad output at the other end. And the same is true for prompt writing. You get out what you put in terms of instruction. But the fear factor is quite real. It's multifaceted. And part of it is the big unknown. We don't know where this is going to end. No one knows where this is going to end. It's a systematic change around the world in extremely fast-paced environment. And I suppose I almost liken it to a pandemic moment. There was a lot of people that couldn't imagine the scenario we were going to get locked in our houses. And because of that, people were taken aback and were unprepared. And I think people need to spend time imagining what it's going to look like in 3 years' time, because that helps you realise that you're feeling fear, but fear shouldn't equal apathy, because this is not going to go away. The march will continue without you if you stop and pause for too long.
I'm going to pass back to Kat in a second, but I just want to clarify really what this means for internal communicators. I think history is littered, we know, with situations where people have pretended that technological changes are not going to happen, and over time they've been overcome by them. Now, often it's been because, I guess, old type technology changes took a while to take place. Now we're saying there's no time. So I think effectively what you're saying is if you try and stand there and say, this won't affect me, you're going to get overwhelmed by it. And then I think for what you're saying, there are 3 ways of addressing it. One is the resources. Clearly, if you can't access digital stuff, you can't use it. So there's a resource issue. But then there's making the case, helping people challenge their fears, break those down, address them, and then provide them with the skills and the technology, like you were saying, the skills to use the technology, like you were saying about prompting. So there's those three elements, it seems to me, that you're doing with your external contacts and your clients. And I guess internal communicators can start to think about it internally as well. I'm sure many of them already are, but those are the things to drive that.
Very definitely. I think we have to empower everyone to be able to talk about this in a constructive and positive way. It's incumbent upon all of us to raise awareness of this is a systems change. It will mean that we work in different ways in the future, and everyone needs to be ready for when that happens. So in terms of internal communicators, I really think first and foremost, it's a group of individuals that need to learn very quickly about the pros and cons and the guardrails, to understand what the company policy should look like, what your ethical standards look like as an organisation, and for those individuals to be the advocates and the ambassadors for creating that systematic change in a safe way within a business. I really do.
And I guess just on the last point, to demystify it, this is what's coming through very clearly from what you're saying. It shouldn't be scary. If you make it scary, people don't want to address it, I suppose. And we need to try and deconstruct that.
Yeah, demystifying, absolutely spot on. I think people are always going to be a bit wary and a bit worried for good reason. And that is because there is so much uncertainty. We also have to be very, very careful of bias. And back to the role of the internal communicator, remembering that these large language models have been trained on systems and content that predominantly has been written by white men, without putting too fine a point on it. And there is language that is used within those environments which can be exclusive rather than inclusive. So yes, we need to demystify it, but we must also be very, very aware of the fact that we have a system that is going to evolve in a far from perfect way. No one has managed to get around the challenges of bias unless you build your model from the ground up. And therefore, we have to be aware of the fact that we might be given insights, instructions, information that is biased. And therefore, the output must always be considered as something that needs intelligent checking. We must make sure that this output is never just packaged up in its initial raw form and shipped. And what we often describe, and I think is a bit of a universal description, is that one should consider an LLM a little bit as an intern. There's fantastic work, it speeds things up, but the output sometimes might have mistakes in it, and we must make sure that we check for those mistakes, whether they are biased, whether they're factually incorrect, or whether it's for some other reason.
I think that's a really important point to underscore. When we were researching the paper that was published by the Institute of Internal Communication, AI and the Future of Internal Communication, we looked at some online material, a webinar that Professor Michael Waldrich from Oxford University, and he is one of the most eminent scholars in the field of AI in this country. He had run a webinar, I can't remember, perhaps in 2023 now, and he was at pains to emphasize that, to your point, most commonly used generative AIs right now were trained on the internet, and the internet is 70% opinion and conjecture. It contains every tweet, every subreddit, every random musing of anybody who has ever published anything on the internet. And so, to your exact point, whatever these LLMs create, it's what Brené Brown would call a shitty first draft, an SFD, which is to say it will get you started, but it should never be deemed of a quality enough to be the final output. And it does require that level of diligence to make sure, right, whatever it is that I've created, whatever content I've created, is it based on fact? Because we know that some of these AIs are prone to hallucination. who does it exclude, who might it offend, all of those things. There's an awful lot of ethical considerations that need to be factored in when we are introducing these tools for day-to-day adoption. But I think earlier on in the conversation, as you were talking, I noted down something that I think is really relevant also, which is that we have so much economic instability and uncertainty now, and most business leaders are just facing a continuous barrage of competing and conflicting priorities. And it is really easy to overlook the fact that people need help upskilling to a level of competence that ensures that the tools deliver the best value that they can. And I was thinking about kind of the picture that you've painted and the origins of Neighbourly and what you've done in partnering with Microsoft to raise the bar of AI literacy. And I was wondering what the opportunity is here for organisations, because I'm assuming that any organisation that is facing this level of financial instability at the moment will be automatically doing what businesses have always done when the economy gets tough, and that is to cut budgets and to reduce the amount of expenditure. And of course, that then has a knock-on effect for charitable donations, because that's just logic. But it makes sense to me that there's something here where organisations who still want to continue to do good things at a local level within their communities, if they have to, for their own survival, upskill their internal stakeholders to a minimum viable level of competency, it strikes me that there's something that could be done here to take that level of learning out into their communities and share the learning, share the good practice, share the case studies and the stories of instances where these large language models have been successful and used for good and so on. So I don't know, some ramblings from me, but what in your view, because this is what you're thinking about all day, every day, right? What should we all be thinking about here, Zoe, do you think?
The nice thing about human beings is that they like telling other human beings stuff. And so the whole AI 1-2-3 model was based on a train the trainer. And when I use the word train, it makes it sound a bit arduous and complex. This is about knowledge sharing. And so we wanted to be able to create a system that enabled individuals to go on and share that knowledge in a way that was meaningful for someone else. And just bringing it back into the household, you might learn something in your day job that is a complete mystery to other people in the household, and you can share it with them. And that really is meaningful because those people will go on and talk to others about it. So there is a great benefit in human behavior, and that is storytelling and being able to share information. So hence why it's so important that baseline of safety, security, safeguarding is really a consideration in everyone's discussions when they're thinking about it. But you also mentioned a little bit around the shitty first draft that sometimes comes out of these LLMs. That is true, but what's helpful for everyone to reflect on here is that means there is still the major case for subject matter experts. What you cannot afford to do is remove that expertise from the business, because you still need someone to be able to say, well, this is right or this is wrong. And that is materially important. When businesses are thinking about adoption of it, this isn't about replacing people, this is about augmenting. The other materially important point is LLMs are taught from data from the internet, and therefore they're notoriously bad at anything numerical. And some people perhaps might go, well, help me with this maths equation, and it does a bad job. And they go, well, that means it's all crap. That's just not true. There are use cases where it excels, and there are other use cases where it really does not. And back to the intern again, the intern isn't going to be brilliant at every subject. It's going to be able to support with some specific topics And the output from the instruction is only as good as the instruction itself. So I think there's all kinds of things included in our thinking about how we upskill everyone in society in a way that means that the net result is economic stability. I also know that, the government AI strategy pins all kinds of productivity metrics on the adoption of AI. There is a huge number that is anticipated in terms of economic growth because of its adoption and use to solve some of the really major challenges that we experience in society, environmental, medical, educational as well. So the only way that we can make those economic gains if people have the skills and they've managed to get started with that baseline that gives them the confidence to then continue on their learning journey. Foundations, materially important.
Yes, and I think my reflection in late 2025 would be that completely what government doesn't want its country to be successful and a major player in the global economy. And yet it strikes me that there are way too many people wandering around the corridors of Whitehall who fundamentally don't understand the challenges that sit in front of us as a country in this AI adoption. And it's all very easy to paint a glossy veneer over what needs to happen in order to get to this mystical future point of national productivity and improved GDP. But there's still, I sound like a UB40 song now, Dominic, many rivers to cross. There are many rivers to cross, but socialising the challenge, I think, is part of the opportunity. And of course, that's what internal communicators do, right? Is to share information and story and so on. And I'm going to doff my cap to you now, Dom, because I always feel very inferior when it comes to discussing the nitty-gritty of internal communication. I know you have many more years' experience in that field.
Absolutely. But I know less about the hits of UB40 than you do, I think. I get stuck at Red, Red Wine. And that was Neil Diamond, really, wasn't it? So
it's still my favourite song, though.
Is it really? Ah, yes, it's a good one. Zoe, as we come into land, and unfortunately we needed to come into land, I was thinking, if, as an internal communicator listening to this, what you've helped us do, amongst a lot of other things, is to start to think about either forming a strategy around what we're going to do around AI, although many people will be doing that, but not less sense test what they're already doing. And you've spoken about helping open up a discussion, my words, but making it all right not to know everything about AI and asking questions. And I think we can do a lot to help create that environment. We've spoken about trying to break things down so that they're less scary. In terms of some of the challenges about, is this going to take my job? But also just about, I feel scary talking about the language and so on. I love the way that we as communicators have a role as subject matter experts to challenge the outputs of AI, not just in terms of accuracy, but also in terms of fairness and some of the assumptions that may be baked in that we need to unbake, if that's a word. I'm not sure you can do that. We talk about making the case. So how do we make the case, say it's worth investing money, but also time and effort from an individual, and then providing them with some of the skills. And I love the whole AI 1, 2, 3 idea about train the trainer and transfer of skills. So there's a lot there from your experience, because you focus a lot on how you can most help people accommodate, use, get the most out of AI the most quickly. What advice would you give an internal communicator as to certain the key things they should be focusing on to see the most advance the quickest, I guess?
I will continue to beat my drum on baseline understanding, build your foundation knowledge, and then make sure that you tell as many people about how to do that as possible in a safe way. This has to be all considered around ethics. We sometimes talk about AI alignment, making sure that actually we're using it for the betterment of society, not for just generating more money at the cost of everything else. So alignment is really important. But as communicators, you are the absolute nucleus of this being adopted by society, by the people in your organisation, because you have the keys in how you communicate when you communicate and what it is that you're going to be explaining. And for you to feel confident, building your knowledge in the first place is absolutely mission critical.
that's a great way, I think, to come into land, because we are, as communicators, the nucleus, I think you said, of helping organizations and society get the most from what is a fascinating thing. So thank you very much for bringing clarity and giving us some prompts and ideas about the use of Gen AI. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for listening today. If you like what you've heard, please like and follow us wherever you access your podcasts.